Hey everybody, it is Ornlu, and well, we have a lot of team games coming up in DE. We've mostly been doing 1v1s as far as tournaments go, and the DE team game ladder, well, just check Reddit to see that it leaves much to be desired. But with that said, we have the Tete Invitational going on right now, which is a little mini team game tournament, sort of getting us hyped for the bigger team game tournament, which is Battle of Africa. Of course, that is coming up soon. That is hosted by Mem, of course. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to sort of discuss the team game meta, what I mean when I use certain terms, why players are doing the things that they're doing in teams and all that stuff. So in this video, I'm going to break down sort of the differences between these team games, the meta as far as, it stands right now, and of course, because it is my video, I will be giving you some good old tier lists in the mix. So without further ado, let's go break down some team games. So starting off with 2v2s, as they are the next step up from 1v1s. These are more different than the 3v3s and 4v4s, which I'm going to talk about together, but it's still one of my favorite game types, and I think there's a lot you can learn from it, because even though your early game army compositions are very much dictated by cavalry civ plus archer civ, as I have on the little card there, overall, as the game goes on, because there's only two of you, you have more diverse army compositions, and your civilization's versatility, how well the player can react in terms of unit switches and all that stuff. That stuff is tested definitely more so in 2v2s than in the larger team games. It's also critically important to have your armies coordinated at any given time, because, again, in a 2v2, although you might have a natural opponent that you're up against, you are all close enough to each other that anybody can be attacked at any time, essentially. And if you start get ganked 2v1, well, then you could be going on a one-way trip to Frown Town. And then, of course, where to attack is very important in any team game, but it's not necessarily as clear, like, do you go for one player or the other? And what I can say is that as a general rule, you and your teammate should go and attack the cavalry player, because the cavalry player, at least in the early to mid game, is going to have a smaller army than the archer player. And of course, if you are attacking the cavalry player, then the archer player, who has, the slow archers, has to run all the way to his teammate's base and is going to be out of position. And that way you are sort of nullifying the speed advantage of the cavalry and can ideally put your opponents in a pretty tricky situation. Also, of course, especially if there's like a mirror situation, you can see two 1v1s develop side by side, which can be pretty interesting, because then you're just playing like a 1v1, but then you have trade at the end, so you never really run out of your gold units, and you can just sort of grind it out into a super big epic game. So 2v2s, not quite the same as larger team games, but still, I think they're quite fun, and it's always enjoyable to see tournaments featuring them. So next up, we have the two larger team game types, 3v3s and 4v4s. I'm talking about these together because they are more or less the same thing. They have the same sorts of characteristics. It's just 4v4s have, well, one more player per team. So in 3v3s and 4v4s, and the Tete Cup that's going on, and Battle of Africa that is coming up, are 3v3 tournaments, so I'll be talking about that in greater detail. But you have these very specified roles with flanks and pockets, so I will be going in depth on the specifics of those later on in this video. But just for now, know that the flank players are the ones that have a teammate on one side and an enemy on the other, so they're at the edges or flanks of your team. And the pockets are the 1 to 2 other players that are, only surrounded by allies and are very far away from the enemy. So in those situations, in general, your flank civs are going to be your archer civs and maybe infantry civs, and your pocket civs are going to be your booming cavalry sorts of civs. And of course, different players are suited to those different sorts of things. But again, I'll talk about that more later. Greater specialization. So unlike the 2v2s where you only have the two players, so you kind of have to make several different types of units just to get a fleshed out army composition, in 3v3s and 4v4s, a lot of it is about spamming one unit. And, you spam one unit, another person spams another unit, and another person spams another unit, and you kind of have pretty much everything covered. So this is where you're going to see civs that aren't maybe as versatile become more powerful, just because if they only need to do one thing and they're really good at doing that one thing, well, go for them because your teammates will have you covered. This is especially true when it comes to what sort of ideal flank and pocket civs, what are these sorts of ideal unit compositions. That stuff is, I guess, a lot more delineated. And as far as strategies goes, slinging, it does happen in 2v2, but it's definitely, I feel, most prevalent in 3v3 and especially 4v4. So slinging, in case you do not know, is when a player essentially just stays in the feudal age, walls themselves in, towers to defend themselves, and then just sends all their resources to a specific teammate, allowing the teammate who is being slung to be launched further ahead than their opponents, and you sort of snowball an advantage that way. It's, I would say, at its most powerful in 4v4s, because you are only losing 1 out of 4 players to the slinging, if that makes sense. Whereas in a 3v3 and especially a 2v2, you're losing a larger quantity of your larger percentage of your team's power. So the only caveat with slinging is it can be very boring to watch, and so it's oftentimes banned in tournaments. I'm not super sure on how slinging is going to be done in upcoming DE team game tournaments, but I still think it is worth discussing because Age of Sling of the Mayans, as they are one of the most common slung civs, has always been very powerful, and it's kind of necessary to talk about. And I guess, of course, 3v3s and 4v4s are different, more than just the one player. And I would say, in general, 3v3s are considered the more difficult and skill testing of the two different game types. Because in 3v3s, you only have the one pocket and the two flanks. So you have to be a bit more team coordinated in terms of, okay, so your pocket has to split duties between either flanks, make sure that nobody is dying. You have just less overall to work with. It's less like, oh, okay, one side is dying, but then the other side is totally fine, so they're just gonna, stomp somebody in Imperial Age. It's a lot more snowbally, and is generally considered the primo type for tournaments, which is why most tournaments tend to be in 3v3s, just because, again, it is that most skill testing sort of game type, according to, most people. But with that said, there is a certain aspect of team games which I haven't talked about much that is sort of the defining aspect of it, and that is trade. So trade is sort of the defining gameplay aspect of, differences between, 1v1s all the way through 4v4s, or it's really what just separates team games from 1v1s, is because you have, inevitability in gold income, which is something that you don't have at all in 1v1s. So how and when to get trade is super important, and most games that go over an hour long are based around completely wiping out your opponent's trade lines or denying all their markets or something like that. So with that said, when should you start trading? When should you be building your markets in the corners of the map and that sort of thing? And there is no one correct time, and every game is going to be different. But as a general rule, it is when your gold starts to run out. Not after your gold is run out. You don't want to be like, oh, I have no gold income, I better start trading. It should be like, okay, I have I don't know, 1,000 to 1,200 gold left. We really need to start trading. And I would say that as far as Arabia and standard land maps go, now I've cast a lot of team games. I'd say 40 minutes. If it's a normal standard game in 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, 40 minutes is a good benchmark, give or take. Obviously, like I said, every game will be different, but that tends to be when gold starts to run low. So if you guys are in doubt, just think about that sort of time in the game. And of course, before you start trade, you want to make sure that you have an entire edge of the map, because the longer the trade route, the more gold you get per trip. So secure corners early. Make sure that again, plan ahead. You don't want to be like, oh, we should start trade. Oh no, we need to secure corners of the map. Like, you should be thinking of that ahead of time. And like I said, you want to start that before gold runs out. So once you get your trade going, you're going to slowly make trade cards a greater and greater and greater part of your economy. You should probably, like 60 trade cards, give or take, is pretty common, like in absolute endgame. And then, of course, how you win the game is often just by getting to that trade line in the back. So make sure that it is as free of obstructions as possible, and also as safe as possible. That's why big old team walls in the late game can be very powerful. So with that said, again, I'm going to be talking more about the larger team games, 3v3s in particular, but I want to dive a bit more in depth into the flanks and the pockets. So what's an Ornlu video without a tier list? So here are my my very, very vague tier list for flank civs. And just to talk about the flank role in general, you are, as the flank player, again, you are the one who is closest to the enemy on your team. So you will always have two flanks, even in a 3v3 or a 4v4. And you are the one who's going to be taking the most punishment. So you can't really be too greedy normally. You want to make sure you're walled, and archers are going to be your go-to option. As you can see, the constant tournament picks, they're all archer civs. They're all good archer civs at that. And that's why the general rule of archer civ flank, cavalry civ pocket is a pretty decent go-to. And, well, it's a little bit more than that, though. Because although you want a good archer civ, I also, and this is a little bit of my personal opinion, you also want a civ that's really good at like a slow push in late game. Because early Imperial Age is ruled by pockets and their paladins or imp camels or whatever. But as the game goes super long, stuff like bombard towers, bombard cannons, monks, super good trebuchets from like Britons or Japanese, all of those things start becoming incredibly powerful as well. So it's like you're kind of the one who's hanging on for, the longest time. But I feel like in super long team games, it's actually the flanks who end up doing the most damage and have the most ultimately powerful, like, slow push army compositions, as opposed to the pockets. So that's why civilizations that have like really good late games on top of being good archer civs, like Ethiopians, Vietnamese, Malay have bombard towers, Italians, Portuguese as well, obviously, and all that sort of thing makes for a good flank civ. But still, the three best civs, just as far as overall how often you see them in tournaments, it is Britons, Mayans, and Chinese. Pick 2 out of 3 for that. And then I would say that Ethiopians and Vietnamese are like a little bit under that, just due to not being quite as powerful in that archer department. And then the rest of the tournament viable civs are like, they're pretty good flank civs, but not exactly your top choices. The good enough for ranked tier of civs are civs that are like, they're fine on, as far as like if you are playing random in like a random team game on ladder or whatnot, and you get this civ on flank, it's like, it's all right. It's not the end of the world. I'm not super unhappy. Yeah, it could be better. Yeah, it could be worse. But there's generally something they could do. These sorts of civs usually either have arbalests or a very strong late game push, or both. And if played well, these civilizations can be super deadly in their own right. The specific ordering on here doesn't really matter that much. I would say, like, generally speaking, the higher you are, the better it is, and the lower you are, the worse it is. But like, don't take this specific ordering too seriously. And of course, the sad flank civs are generally the ones that are cavalry civs, if you can't tell. Ones with weak archers and economic bonuses that are better the longer the game goes on, because usually you just don't have that time or space if you're on flank. So you really need to be very careful if you are, one of these sad flank civs on the flank. The one exception is if you kind of get a situation where, say, you get Persian flank and Britain pocket, you can kind of just play the roles that you would want to play and just kind of switch. Obviously, it's not ideal, but you can do that. But say you have like a good pocket civ, like Persians, and then on flank you land Bulgarians, well, then things get a little bit bad. So I would definitely say civs that have like really bad archers but solid unique units, and that is of course going to be Spanish and Berbers, maybe Bulgarians, Arambai, Berbers, or no, Burmese. There we go. You can even, I would say, heavily consider just going for a Trush into Castle Drop, just like really get aggressive. And I would say that would probably be your best bet with those sorts of civilizations, where just going for archers is like not at all good. So those are the sorts of flank civs, and how they stack up. And I'm going to talk about pockets next, obviously. But notice that the pocket tier list is not going to be a perfect inverse of this, but it's going to be more or less an inverted tier list, which is, I think, kind of interesting. Okay, so now moving on to pocket civs, everyone's favorite position to play because you just get to chill and boom and let your ally die. Oh, what flank? You need a help? You're getting 2v1? Okay, have a scout. I'm busy booming. It's generally the most popular position to play just because it is, I would say, a bit easier. And you can also have the most impact, especially in like Castle Age to mid-Imperial Age. And this is, in general, going to be your good cavalry plus booming civs. If you look at the constant tournament pick civs, I would say there is actually a lot more diversity in terms of like super good pocket civs compared to super good flank civs. You can see that, well, Franks, Spanish, Persians, Cumans, and Huns all have paladins and good economies. Indians have imperial camels, which is, equivalent to a paladin. And Khmer have elite battle elephants, which are super, super, super insanely good. So you can kind of see why all of these civilizations are going to be your absolute top tier. They have good economies and a good, powerful cavalry late game unit. Some others can boast other advantages, like, say, Khmer obviously have... they don't have the speed of the paladin, but they have super strong scorpions. Spanish have bombard towers, and of course their super good late game trade bonus. Indians can go into cav archers, Cumans can add Kipchoks, slept lancers, Huns can add cav archers. You guys get the idea. So all of those are going to be absolutely excellent as far as pockets go. The tournament viable, again, it's the civs that they're fine if you get them in pocket, even in you can see them tangentially maybe in some tournament games if, say, the top civs are taken. But these are going to be civs that are generally good cavalry civs as well, but might lack the either the late game power or the good eco bonuses that the top civs have. So you have the rest of your fully upgraded paladin civs here. You have Lithuanians, Bulgarians, Magyars. You have the good elephants with Burmese, as well as their Arambai, Mayans. You can go fast castle plumed archers. Mongols have a little bit of an awkward transition because their heavy cavalry sucks, but their Mangudai are insane in the late game. And that can kind of be said the same for Berbers as well. But yeah, you guys get the idea of why these civs would be strong, but not quite at that top level. And of course, your good enough for ranked civs are anything that has more or less fully upgraded Cavalier is like okay as pocket. So you have Bloodlines, you have +4 defense, Cavalier, all that stuff is okay. And that's like most of these civs. Teutons, of course, do have Paladins, but they are going to be a bit slower. Chinese and Malians both have great ecos and Cavaliers and Camels even. Same goes for Turks. Saracens have no Cavalier, but they have not imp camels. They're super strong heavy camels and Mamelukes and a super good late game anyway. Portuguese Italians have Cavalier, like I said. Tatars, Cavalier, and they can switch over into good Cav archers or maybe even their Keshegs. Vietnamese, fully upgraded Cavalier and maybe battle elephants. Japanese, they actually don't have fully upgraded Cavalier, but because they are a strong civ in terms of having a good early game, as well as good options in the late game, I still squeaked them into good enough for ranked. And of course, the sad pocket civs are the very sad ones. You can see a lot of these are actually some of the top civs for flank. But essentially, any civ with bad cavalry, like really bad cavalry, is going to be in the sad pocket civ land. You know, none of these civs have bloodlines. 2 of the 3 American civs are down here, and generally the civs that have like some of the worst cavalry in the game are going to be rather sad in pocket. They're bad in pocket for the same reason that cavalry civs are bad on flank. If you're going for archers or most infantry or gunpowder even, it's going to be very slow. Units are slow, and you just kind of slowly creep out onto the map, and, well, you've got a lot of map to cover before you can get to your enemies. So, and especially if you're needing to support your flank quickly, then, yeah, you're going to want a different sort of civ. So that is going to be my brief little overview on team games, the sorts of strategies you see, why certain civs are good, why you see certain pros pick these strategies and civs on any given map, what we can expect to see in Battle of Africa, and a lot of the really interesting. I look for a lot of interesting strategies and army compositions and all that cool stuff, and a really high-level team game is just as enjoyable as a high-level 1v1, in my opinion, as far as watching goes. So I thought that this would be fun and interesting for you guys to look at. And so, yeah, definitely leave a like if you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.